So I wanted to revisit the Monroeville Mall situation again today to see if we couldn't get answers to a couple of questions. Will the new mall security system, is that an effective thing in a large open place like this, checking IDs and things like that? B, can you ever make an open place like that, a public place like that, completely secure? And then C, my goodness, if you're in a situation, you're in the mall, like Terrell Pryor, my goodness, was tweeting out the other night. He's in the mall. Here's the shots. He says he sees two people drop. What do? I'm thinking I'm not tweeting. I'm thinking I'm doing something else. But in any case, we wanted to get some answers from an expert, and boy, do we have one. Joining us on the Disk Institute of Pittsburgh Newsline is the head of CSI Corporate Security and Investigations, Lou Gentile. And Lou, welcome back to KDKA. We appreciate it. Lou, are you there?
Hello? Yes, I am. Thank you.
I appreciate your coming on. Lou, let me start with the first question. In the wake of the mall shooting Saturday night, the mall has already taken at least an initial step in tightening down who gets into the mall unaccompanied on Friday and Saturday nights. It goes like this. After 6 p.m. in the evening, anybody 18 or under must be in the presence of somebody 21 or older. Now, they're only doing this in the public entrances to the mall. The stores that have their own entrances into the mall, they're not going to be covered necessarily. But they say it's a first step. Can it be effective? Just the word of it maybe getting out be effective?
Quite frankly, no. And Doug Cole, he certainly has his hands out there. Monroeville's lucky to have him. But, this is not a police problem, Bill. It's a public safety problem. First of all, the mall is too porous. The architecture is such that it doesn't afford itself to security. Malls were built the same way that schools were built. They were built for fire safety and to escape. They have nothing to do with security. So you are getting information and credentialing people to come in after 6. What about people that are there before 6 and they're hanging out just waiting to do something after 6? And typically now what's happening is you see the older gangbangers. What they're doing is they use the younger gangbangers to carry their guns, to carry their drugs, to carry their messages. So,
who, by the way, might be over 21, right? And so they can all get in the door.
Exactly. So you have 21 that's coming in with a youngster who's 14, and it's not unusual for a 14-year-old to be carrying a gun now. And so what does that do? Is it a first step? Okay, it's a first step. Is it a Band-Aid? It's a Band-Aid. But this is a multidisciplinary approach. Anytime that you have a public forum, a public venue like this, can you guarantee safety? Of course not. You can get guns. If you can get guns and drugs into a maximum security prison, you're not going to provide a mall that's completely safe. But there are things that you can do.
Yeah, the DA was talking about in his frustration stuff that he'd suggested, like a license plate tracking system, like better cameras around the mall, and that seems to be, after the fact, stuff to catch the guys after it's done. What can you do in order to keep the mall itself safer from the attacks?
Well, cameras are only good if cameras are monitored. And most companies, most entities that have cameras, they use them after the fact and not before the fact. Very few companies, very few security entities will have someone sitting there watching the cameras. If that's the case, they'll be very good and very effective. And we could deal with some basic things. Let me give you an example. A number of years ago, they had a similar problem in the North Hills in a mall. I don't want to mention the name of the mall. It was just as egregious as this was. What they did? They passed an ordinance. They passed an ordinance forbidding loitering on behalf of juveniles. The first weekend that the ordinance was passed, law enforcement had 2 buses there. They gathered about 60 kids that were loitering. They picked them up. They brought them to the station. They called their parents. Their parents paid a fine. Guess what? There was no more loitering at the mall. Now, when you deal with situations like this, you're dealing with 2 categories of people. You're dealing with categories of people who have families where their behavior can be deterred, and then you're dealing with categories of people, too bad that don't have families, and so there is no deterrence. So then you deal with how do you prevent that. So there are ways to do that as well. The mall is like a melting pot. It has an integration of children from all of the schools contiguous to that area of the mall. There are task forces that have been formed in other parts of the country. Task forces made up of teachers, of police officers, etc. People who talk There is virtually, I will bet that mall shooting, I will bet, just as cases in the school, someone knew about that shooting that was going to occur before it happened. The problem is that there was no intelligence that was gathered to be able to prevent that shooting. There can be task forces, linkages with schools, so that these children have a conduit of information to be able to provide that information to someone who's really going to take a proactive approach to it.
Lou Gentile I'm sorry, go ahead, Lou.
When we deal with security, we deal with three components of it. First of all, how do you prevent it? If you can't prevent it, how do you control it? And if you can't control it, how do you respond to it? So in order to get to the second phase, if you can't control it, then you have to have an adequate security force. And you know what? The mall, the business owners at the mall, they have an obligation. They have an obligation to their tenants. They have an obligation to their employees. They have an obligation to the customers. And they have an obligation to put into place an adequate security force and just not depend on a police department because the police department can't do the job. You know, these security personnel have to be adequately trained in things like conflict resolution. They have to be able to know how to be able to cite, a particular problem that's instigating and be able to intervene before it goes off.
And Lou, I've got to stop you right there only for time's sake, but I appreciate this, and I hope that we don't have to have the discussion sooner, but I always appreciate it anytime you can bring your expertise to it. Thanks for your time.
You're welcome.
Lou Gentile is the president of CSI Corporate Security and Investigations, joining us on the Disc Institute of Pittsburgh Newsline.